Okay, so this week, it's really a double portion in the Torah. The two portions are called Tazria and Mitzora. Generally speaking, they speak about the theme of what the Torah refers to as Tzarrat, which is a form of leprosy, like a skin ailment. And there's very intricate details about this, how it looks and its form, and that generally speaking, it's a form of impurity. And a person would become impure with this ailment. They would go to the priest, and depending on the how it looks, and depending if it expands or not, that would make the difference of whether or not the person was pure and impure. So when there's one portion, generally speaking, about the impurity, and then there's another portion speaking about the purity. Okay, so we have a doctor here, and the doctor says, well,
this is interesting.
Doctor says, I've also seen, skin diseases, but all the commentaries explain that this was not considered just a physical ailment, because if that were the case, the way of treating it, the Torah, it would be a very strange way to treat it, because at least by what they understood in their times, you want to expose it to dry sunlight. Torah says you quarantine the person in a closed home, which just doesn't seem like the right thing to do. And the consensus amongst the commentaries is that Maimonides talks about this. He says that we're talking about a unnatural, it's a miraculous sign. And in short, when a person would be spiritually unworthy, specifically through slander, if a person would speak against other people, evil speech or slander or other forms of negative speech, then that was the punishment. And the idea was that if I speak against people behind their back, or generally, if I speak against people, I'm breaking up the fabric of the community. So the penalty is that I get this form of impurity, and I'm basically isolated. And if I'm sitting alone, it's a very different form of impurity. All other impurities, the impure person would have to leave the temple or leave Jerusalem, but you don't have to sit alone. You don't have to. You can hang out with other people who are ritually impure. Here, the person would have to sit alone. And the idea is there's sort of a punishment, sort of measure for measure. Because I'm undermining community, I can't benefit from community. And that's supposed to bring me to repentance. And that is supposed to bring me to repentance. And that is supposed to lead the person back into rehabilitation of coming back into the community. And the second parsha, I said it's two parshas. The second parsha is the process of how you bring the person back in. And therefore, even though, like Maimonides says, all these laws basically don't happen today, because we're not talking about a natural ailment. But nevertheless, when we learn it, we think about the symbolism of what it represents, and also the symbolism of what the purity of the Tzarrat represents. And therefore, even what seems like a very technical, dry parsha turns out to be one of my personal favorites, because I love the various descriptions of the skin ailments and the colors and the this and that, or the process of purification. But it's just, there's so much that the commentaries explain, both the classic commentators and the Hasidic commentators and the Kabbalistic commentators, about what this means, how you could look at these verses and think about how to bring people together. So that's general introduction. And what we're going to try to do today, if we have a few minutes, is look at one law that seems like a very technical law, and then show how that law has symbolism that's tremendous, and it could be applied to everybody's life. And specifically, I'll give you the spoiler alert. We're going to be talking about the mitzvah of lighting Shabbos candles. How does that fall in? Well, with a little creativity, everything is connected to this parsha. So that's the introduction.
It's funny, since we have the time to be able to just go back and forth, it becomes a little bit more interesting, I guess, because I don't feel like I'm stealing from other people's time.
Never. Our questions always enhance and make it more meaningful for everybody.
Well, it's an interesting thought, but there is something called neurodermatitis, where a neurological cause could create a rash that otherwise you wouldn't have.
Fascinating.
It is because when you're talking about people coming to see you and you making a diagnosis of a something deeper than just an ordinary medical physical thing,
Yeah.
you could create a diagnosis which is definitely a mental thing.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So the spiritual and the physical are interconnected.
They said, well, we know that
Yes.
because of the spiritual effect, your JLI series about
Yes.
mind
Yes.
and the spirit.
Indeed. 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 Okay, so that's the first introduction. Thank you for that, Doctor.
Sure.
A little bit more, just in general, because we're going to be doing something that is quite unique for. It's not unique because we're exposed to it, but the concept of understanding that every law in Torah, we're going to be studying a disagreement about a matter of law, technical law, ritual law, call it what you want, but the understanding that every part of Torah is precise, and every part of Torah is not just technical. The technical part is the body, but Torah also has a soul, and the soul is the spiritual meaning. And sometimes it looks like we're studying Torah and we're just discussing technical matters, but the technical matters have a spiritual significance, and that was something that Rebbe really highlighted, that all parts of Torah are interconnected, and it's like body and soul. So whenever you learn the law, you also have to ask yourself, what's the deeper meaning? What's the deeper symbolism? And that's what we're going to try to do now, in the context of the Tzarrat, in the context of bringing healing from the Tzarrat. So it's a long essay, and there's a lot to talk about, and we don't have an infinite amount of time, but hopefully we could spend a half an hour, 40 minutes, and get some good meaning out of this experience. Okay, so
I'm sorry, I missed hearing if this is the combined. I know it is combined parsha this week, but is this discourse on both of them or on one?
It's not on the, it doesn't focus on the combination, because it's really one. It's a detailed law about the Mitzorah entering a home. So yes, the way it basically divides is it divides that the first parsha is primarily about the impurity, and the second parsha is about the purity, how to purify from this ailment. So technically speaking, there are other essays that talk about the division and how the names of the two parshas, how they come together. This year they come together. But here we're going to be talking about, so technically it's more like, it's focusing on a verse in the first parsha. Actually, no, it's on the verse in the second parsha. It's technically talking about the second parsha, but like I said, the general theme is the impurity and purity of Tzarrat, so it's related to both, I think.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll share the screen and we begin. We begin with a technical, whoops, no. Did I share the wrong thing? No, I shared the right thing. Okay.
And can you share the link, please?
Yes, let's do that right now. Okay, fine. Here we go. So we start with the technical law. What's the law? The verse states, all the days that the affliction is upon him, he shall remain impure. He shall stay in isolation. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. So I made a mistake. This is the first parsha, the parsha of Tazria, which describes the impurity. So in other words, the person has to be, he has to be outside the camp, and his dwelling shall be outside the camp. That word, we're going to talk about that word, his dwelling, his home. So this teaches that the Mitzorah's dwelling becomes impure. In other words, not only, there's different forms of impurity in the book of Leviticus and the Torah. Sometimes a person is impure. Sometimes not only is the person impure, but the entire home could become impure. So we learn from here, look at footnote 2. Footnote 2 is Taras Kain in the Medrash that teaches that not only is the person with the affliction of Tzarrat impure, but if he comes into the whole home becomes impure. What does that mean? Well, it depends. We get into the details. Different vessels could be purified or could not be purified. Okay, we're not going to get into the details, but the impurity enters the home as well, and it affects the furniture and other things in the home. Okay, now we have a problem. What happens if I'm living in my house and I'm pure, but somebody who is impure, who has the impurity of Tzarrat, enters my home, sort of with my permission, without my permission? That's going to be part of the discussion. So says the Mishnah, so when a Mitzorah, someone with the Tzarrat, enters his friend's house, the Mishnah teaches utensils in the house immediately become impure. That's the first opinion. Guy steps into my house, it's not his home, but he's a Mitzorah. He stepped into his home, immediately everything in the home becomes impure. Rabbi Yehuda says, only if the Mitzorah remained in the house long enough to light a candle. Okay, that's the Mishnah. In other words, they say it doesn't happen immediately. It takes some time. Someone enters my home. The home does not become impure immediately, according to the second opinion. First opinion says it does, and everything becomes impure immediately. The second opinion says, no, you have to wait until a little bit of time elapses. How much time? As long as it takes to light a candle. I have no idea how long it takes to light a candle. Today, to strike a match takes a second. Well, I'm sure that those days there, it wasn't so, that the technology was not developed as much. Maybe you had a Flintstone, maybe you took a few strikes, but you have a few seconds. You have a period of time. Okay. Now, we're going to continue. The commentators explain that Rabbi Yehuda's opinion applies specifically in a case when the Mitzorah enters his friend's house without permission. When the Mitzorah enters this with permission of the homeowner, Rabbi Yehuda would agree that the other person's house immediately becomes the Mitzorah's dwelling, and thus utensils immediately become impure. Okay. For this reason, Rabbi Yehuda allows the homeowner some time, long enough to light a candle, to ask the Mitzorah to leave. If, however, the Mitzorah remains in the house for this amount of time, and the homeowner does not remove him, the house becomes the dwelling of the Mitzorah. For in this scenario, we consider it as if the Mitzorah has tactically received the homeowner's permission. Therefore, all the utensils in the home become impure. What are we saying? We're saying like this. The Torah says that the home of the Mitzorah becomes impure. Now, my home is not the home of the Mitzorah. So just because the Mitzorah comes into my home, why would that make my home impure? It's not the home of the Mitzorah. So Rabbi Yehuda's logic is like this. If the Mitzorah goes in, if a Mitzorah goes into his own home, impurity happens immediately. If the Mitzorah goes into my home, Rabbi Yehuda says, if I give him permission to enter, then it's like his home. He has permission. He has the right to be here. So the home becomes impure. If until I give him permission, it doesn't become impure because it's not his home. So what Rabbi Yehuda says, when somebody walks in, the homeowner has a few seconds or a certain period of time to protest, to tell the Mitzorah to leave. But if I'm silent for as long as it takes to light a candle, then that means that I agree that the Mitzorah is here and my house becomes impure. Okay, fine. That's the disagreement. That's wonderful. What a wonderful, inspiring disagreement. What we're going to want to think about, of all the things you could have thought about, why specifically do you say lighting a candle? Right? Let's say Rabbi Yehuda wants to give you 20 seconds. So say something else. I don't know, however long it takes. First, I'll say 20 seconds. Or bring another example of a household chore that takes 20 seconds. Why lighting a candle? So you could just say, well, it's just a random example. But no, in Torah, nothing is random. So we're going to have really three interpretations of why Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah uses this example. One is a Kabbalistic one from the Rebbe's father. One is going to be the legal one from the commentaries of the Mishnah, and one is going to be what the Rebbe is going to add. So, but the premise is that if we say, Rabbi Yehuda says that the amount of time that the Mitzorah could be in the home before the home becomes impure, someone else's home, is lighting a candle, it's not just an example, a random example, but the theme of lighting of the candle is critical here. What does the candle represent? So we have three opinions. The last two are interconnected. So that's the big idea here. Let's continue. Let's make some progress with reading the essay. The reason we give, this is still the commentators, a simple interpretation. The reason we give the homeowner this measure of time long enough to light a candle, to turn to the Mitzorah, to turn out the Mitzorah is as follows. It is possible that when the Tzarrat had entered, the homeowner was busy lighting a candle. For this reason, the homeowner did not yet ask the Tzarrat to leave. And the Tzarrat was in the house without permission. Therefore, we wait for long enough to light a candle. That's what the commentaries say. The commentaries say, you came into my house. Maybe I'm busy. Maybe I'm lighting a candle. So the fact that I didn't tell you to leave immediately is not because I agree with I give you permission to be here. It's because I'm too busy doing something else, namely lighting the candle. But if I let you stay long enough than lighting a candle, so obviously I allow you to be here and my house becomes impure. But the question, of course, is why this example? There could have been another example, right? So section 2, why a candle? Everything in Torah is absolutely precise. There are many activities that a homeowner could be busy doing that the Mishnah could have chosen, but the Mishnah chose long enough to light a candle. Moreover, the Mishnah does not mean that the homeowner was actually lighting a candle. As Rush explains, the commentary Rush explains, sometimes the homeowner is busy lighting a candle or doing some other chore. Furthermore, people usually only light candles when it is dark. However, the time frame long enough to light the candle applies even when the Tzarrat enters his friend's house during the day. As the commentators explained, the reason for this is that the sages formulated a blanket rule that applies under all circumstances. This shows that there is a connection between lighting candles and the Mishnah's law, that until this time elapses, the utensils in the house do not become impure. What is the Rebbe saying? The Rebbe is saying that essentially the truth of the matter is it's actually a bad example. Lighting a candle is not the most practical example. Why not? Because when do people light candles? People light candles at night. So why don't you bring an example that applies during the day as well? And especially in the olden days, people generally didn't go to people's homes at night because it was hard to travel at night, etc. So during the day, I enter your house is a much more common scenario. Yet the Mishnah says, when the Mishnah wants to bring an example of an amount of time, that according to Rav Yehuda, if I enter your home, I have a grace period before I make your home impure, and that grace period is lighting a candle. Why a candle? So it must be that lighting a candle has intrinsic connection to this law. And that's what we're getting at. And we're going to do two things. Like I said, we're going to start with the Rebbe's father's commentary, and then which is more Kabbalistic, and then we're going to go to the Rebbe's, which is more Hasidic. But so far, I just want to make sure we're on the same page. We didn't get lost with the details and the technicalities. Okay, so if there's no protests, I guess we're on the same page. What does the Rebbe's father say? The Rebbe's father says like this. Kabbalah, yeah?
Can I just ask you?
Yes, please.
The term utensils, can you define them, please?
So there's a halachic definition of utensils. In fact, the longest tractate, is it the second to longest tractate in the Talmud, in the Mishnah, is called Kelim, vessels, utensils. And there are 24 chapters. It's a very long tractate. And it talks about the laws of purity and impurity about utensils. So what do I mean by utensils? Utensils could mean basically any man-made, what's the word I'm looking for? Any man-made object that's in the home, but that is not a home. So a chair is from the halachic perspective, a chair is a utensil, a table is a utensil, plates are utensils, silverware are utensils, go on and on and on. Everything you have in your house that's not your house is technically a utensil.
Got it. Thank you.
So it doesn't have to have a receptacle, but it has to be something that is man-made and something that has some usage. Now, what's the law of a utensil, and could a utensil become impure? That's a whole discussion. That all depends. Depends on what the material is made of. It depends what type of impurity, and it depends. So we're not going to get into all of that. Like I said, 24 chapters in the Mishnah, but we're just going to talk generally speaking, right? So generally speaking, if my house becomes impure, my vessels become impure. I just want to say something about impurity. In the Mishnah, for example, the laws of purity and impurity are a sixth of the Mishnah. In other words, it's a tremendous part of Jewish law. The thing is that today it's not so relevant. Why? In biblical times, you're allowed to be impure. We all are ritually impure. There's nothing wrong with being ritually impure. The only time it's relevant is that you're not allowed to go to the temple, or you're not allowed to eat the flesh of the sacrifices if you're impure. So in biblical times, when you had a Pesach offering, your Passover Seder was bringing a Pesach offering. So before Pesach, you have to become impure. You have to become ritually pure if you want to eat the Pesach offering. If you are a priest, and in biblical Israel, you did not have a portion in the land of Israel. So how did you support yourself? Because the Jewish people gave teruma, they gave gifts of produce to the priest. If you're a priest, you must eat the teruma in a state of ritual purity. So if you're a priest, it's very important because you can't eat dinner unless you're ritually pure. So the laws of ritual purity were a very central part of life in Israel in the times of the temple, especially for the priests, but even for all the Jewish people, especially in the times of the pilgrimage holidays, etc. Today, we're all ritually impure because we come in contact with a dead person and we don't have the temple to purify us because you need the red heifer, and for the red heifer you need a temple. So today we're all ritually impure. So a lot of this is not as relevant. But again, the teaching, the symbolism and the mystical interpretations are, of course, very much relevant because Torah is true on many various different levels. In the future, God willing, in time of Mashiach, we'll go back to the temple. We're going to have to become ritually pure to enter the temple, and all this part of the Torah becomes relevant again. It's probably the case that the reason why there is no tractates of Talmud on the tractates on that section is in the Mishnah, which discuss ritual impurity, because by the time the Talmud was been put together, there was no temple, so they were less relevant. Okay, so that is just a thing about purity. Okay, fine. Let's go back to the Kabbalistic reason. Again, the Mishnah brings an example. How long can I be in a home before the home becomes impure? Lighting of a candle. And we're going to get to the Rebbe's father. The Rebbe's father was a Kabbalist. You open up his words, it's all Kabbalah. His works are all Kabbalah. The Kabbalah explains, and it's brought down in the Zohar, it's brought down in many Kabbalistic works, that the Tzarrat is, it's explained in Hasidic discourses at length, so I don't want to get into it too much, but Tzarrat occurs when a person lacks what the Kabbalah calls the light of Chachma, the light of wisdom, as opposed to the light of Bina, the light of understanding. In short, what this means in simple English is as follows. There are 10 sfirot. Every sfira is different. The highest sfira is Chachma. Chachma is wisdom, but Chachma is more than wisdom. In Kabbalah, wisdom, and in biblical Hebrew really, wisdom is synonymous with humility. In fact, the word for wisdom, Chachma, koachma, the power of what? Wisdom is the power to understand that there's something beyond me and be open to that. As opposed to understanding is a different feeling. The understanding is I feel that I understand, right? That's a lower level because it captures what I understand. Chachma is the openness to that which I don't understand, that which is beyond me. And some people don't really have that, and therefore they're not creative because they can't be open to new ideas. They're locked in their own perspective. Chachma, wisdom, is the ability to be open to that which is beyond me. Now, therefore, Chachma is synonymous with humility. Says the Kabbalah, the problem with this guy who has Tzarrat, is the essential problem. He's missing the awareness of Chachma. He's missing the awareness of what is beyond himself. He's missing the humility. And because he has no humility, that trickles down to the fact that he is arrogant. And because he's arrogant, he doesn't like the other person. And because he doesn't like the other person, therefore he speaks slander against the other person. But the origin of the problem, what's the problem? The fact that I can't get along with my friend and the fact that I slander my friend is just a symptom. The cause is that I'm missing the humility that comes along with the sphera of Chachma. That is the Kabbalistic interpretation of the concept of Tzarrat. Says the Rebbe's father, one second. Another metaphor, a metaphor for Chachma is light. Light is enlightenment. It's a metaphor in Kabbalah. It's a metaphor for wisdom. So what do we see here? Rabbi Yehuda wants to say that while you're lighting the candle, the house does not become impure. What's the mystical, symbolic significance of that? What it's basically telling you is if you have light, if you're in the process of lighting a candle, if you're introducing the humility of Chachma into your life, then you're immune to the impurity of Tzarrat. Now go back and read the Mishnah. The Mishnah says a simple thing. The Mishnah says that we want to bring an example. The Mishnah says an example of that when a Metzora, a person who was ritually impure with the Tzarrat, enters the home, a certain amount of time could elapse before the house becomes impure. But why does the Mishnah bring the example of lighting a candle? So the legal interpretation does not explain it yet. We'll get to the legal interpretation in a minute. But the mystical interpretation says, because we're bringing an example, this alludes to another whole deeper meaning, which is that light is the antithesis and protects you from the Tzarrat, from the impurity. Why? Because light is humility. Light is wisdom. Wisdom is humility. If you have the humility, you're humble. If you're humble, you're not going to speak against your friend. Because again, the whole idea of the quarrel with my friend is because my ego doesn't tolerate his ego. But if I'm humble, I don't have that problem. So that's essentially what the Rebbe's father says, a beautiful Kabbalistic interpretation. That itself was worth it to get together for 34 minutes and study. But there's more. So let's read it inside. Says the Rebbe, my father explains that this matter in his gloss to the aforementioned Mishnah. Now it's going to be a little bit more Kabbalistic than I said it. House refers to the sphere of Malchut. Impurity results from the withdrawal of the light of Chachma. This is a quote from, where's it a quote from? 10. Where's it a quote from? Eitz Chaim, 13. Okay, therefore, as long as the homeowner is busy lighting a candle refers to the effusion of the light of Chachma. The impurity of the Metzora cannot spread throughout the house. This also explains why specifically a Kohen ever sees the process of purifying a Metzora. He shall be brought to the Kohen. The Kohen shall go to the camp. This is because the Kohen elicits the light of Chachma, as explained in the Likutei Torah of Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the founder of Chabad. In other words, basically we have a Kabbalistic interpretation, and we say, what is the symbolism of lighting a candle? The symbolism of lighting a candle is the introduction of the light of wisdom. If you introduce the light of wisdom, you are immune to the impurity of Tzarrat, because the impurity of Tzarrat comes again from slander. Slander emerges from the arrogance, and the arrogance is the antithesis of wisdom. It's the withdrawal of wisdom. Arrogant understanding can bring you out arrogance. Person feels like I'm an expert. I know everything there's to be known on the subject. That makes me arrogance, but that's not wisdom. That's understanding. Wisdom is the ability to understand how small I am in relation to the infinite knowledge or the knowledge of God. And that is the antithesis of the impurity. Okay, does this make sense? Do we understand the symbolism, right? Because again, it's not exactly the law saying something else. The law is just saying that the light is just a period of time, how long it takes for the impure person to make the house impure. But the fact that we chose this example tells you that lighting the candle is a protection against the house becoming impure. And we gave a mystical reason, because lighting a candle represents wisdom. Wisdom is synonymous with humility. If you have the humility of Chachma, you pure the arrogance which leads to Tzarrat, to the impurity. So that is step number one. We didn't really start just to talk yet. We just got into the Rebbe's father's interpretation. Okay? Okay, just looking at the time, it's not that encouraging. We're not going to have that much time, so I want to say a little bit by heart, and then we'll read a few paragraphs inside, and hopefully we'll get some beautiful ideas. So the first thing, let's go back to I gave you the mystical interpretation. Let's go back to what the commentators say, the simple interpretation, which is why when Rabbi Yehuda wants to bring an example of a few minutes of that as long as a person's, in other words, the homeowner has a few minutes has a few seconds, a few moments to light a candle, but in other words, a few minutes will pass before the home becomes impure. But the first few minutes, the house does not become impure. So why do we bring an example of lighting a candle? That is the question. So the commentaries say like this: look, we want to bring an example of something that the homeowner is preoccupied with, and he can't stop to ask the guy to leave. Because remember, we started out saying that the reason why, Rabbi Yehuda's reasoning is that you can only make my home impure is if I agree that you're here. How do I know that I agree with you here? Because the fact that you stepped in is not enough, because maybe I didn't have a chance to ask you to leave. So we want some time to pass where I could ask you to leave. And if I didn't, means I agree with your being here, and therefore you can make my home impure. But why lighting a candle? So if I'm lighting a candle, I can't ask you to leave while I'm lighting a candle. I can't do two things at once. So the commentaries say, oh, that's why he brings the example of lighting a candle, because we're not talking about lighting any candle. We're talking about lighting the candle Friday night. Talking about Friday afternoon, Friday twilight. We're talking about lighting the Shabbos candles. When a person is lighting Shabbos candles, he's doing a mitzvah. While he's doing the mitzvah, he can't interrupt and to ask the guy to leave. So we bring an example of something like if I'm frying an egg and somebody walks into my house, I could say, leave while I'm frying the egg. It's not a problem. If I'm lighting a candle any other day, I see a stranger who's impure walking into my house, I could say, leave while I'm lighting the candle. But Friday night, I cannot tell the guy to leave while I'm lighting the candle because I'm doing a mitzvah. I can't interrupt. So that is why we bring the example of lighting candles, because we're referring to lighting the candles Friday night. That is what at least one commentator writes. So now what the Rebbe is going to do, the Rebbe says, okay, let's use my father's logic. What is the Rebbe's father's logic? The Rebbe's father's logic is that the Rebbe's father said light is the antithesis of the Tzarrat. Light prevents against Tzarrat. Now we're going to say specifically Shabbos candles protects against Tzarrat. That's why, according to the commentaries, when Rabbi Yehuda says the amount of time that elapses before the house becomes impure is the amount of time it takes to light Shabbos candles, means Shabbos candles, because Shabbos candles is the antithesis to Tzarrat. So let's see what Shabbos candles are, and let's see how that protects us against Tzarrat. Okay, now we have our work cut out. And I'll give you the... Go ahead.
Does it say who's the one who says that it's the Shabbos candles?
So it's Tiferes Yisrael. Tiferes Yisrael is a 19th century commentator on the Mishnah.
Thank you.
You want to know his exact, I should know his biography, but...
No, it's okay, don't worry. I can look at it.
Tiferes Yisrael. Okay, so there's a Tiferes Yisrael from the Maharal, but we're not referring to that. We're talking to Tiferes Yisrael was, his name was Rabbi Israel Lifshitz. He passed away in 1860. He was a rabbi in Germany, and he wrote a commentary on the Mishnah called Tiferes Yisrael, a very famous commentary on the Mishnah. Okay. Okay, fine. So what are we going to say? Shabbos candles is the antithesis of Tzarrat. So we'll start with the basic idea, and then just a simple reason of why that is, and then we're going to get to the mystical. The simple idea is where it is. Why do we light Shabbos candles? So the Talmud says, Maimonides quotes it, is because peace in the home. Peace in the home. In other words, the theme of the Shabbos candles is peace. Tzarrat is division, is separation between people. So the Shabbos candles is the antithesis of Tzarrat. Shabbos candles brings people together, increases peace in the home, and therefore, spiritually speaking, Shabbos candles is the antithesis of Tzarrat, and therefore, as long as you're involved in Shabbos candles, and in the Mishnah, it's literally how long it takes you to light the Shabbos candles. But when you talk about this conceptually, what we're saying is as long as you introduce the concept of Shabbos candles into your home and you internalize its message, you're protected against the division and the divisiveness of Tzarrat. That's step number one. But we're going to go a little deeper, and we're going to say like this. Okay. Okay, that's the first idea. And I want to read at least a few paragraphs here because there's a very interesting distinction that the Rebbe makes here. And basically, not every light equals peace. Sometimes light, symbol of light, you said light is so beautiful. Yeah, but sometimes light is actually antithetical to peace. Sometimes light undermines peace, but light of Shabbos candles brings peace. So let's try to read that a little bit, and we'll see how far we can go. Okay, let's read. To explain, the Mishnah discusses not the mitzvah. Okay, therefore, this subject is related primarily to Shabbos candles. Since their unique purpose is to foster peace in the home, the Shabbos candles are meant to illuminate the home so that no one will stumble on a stick or a stone, offering protection so that nothing undesirable occurs in the house. Therefore, they also prevent the impurity from spreading throughout the house. So, in other words, the basic idea of Shabbos candles, this is a quote, that a purpose is that a person shouldn't trip on a stick or a stone. Think about before there's electricity. You're sitting in the dark. There's no peace. It's not pleasant. It's not tranquil because wherever you turn around, you start stumbling. So the Shabbos candles, the idea that the sages say when you eat Friday night, you should have light in your home is to foster peace in the home, protect the home, and therefore that's the protection against the impurity of the Tzarrat. Okay. I want to read number 4. Number 4 is very interesting, and then there's a lot more to say about this. We'll see how far we can go. One may still ask, by their physical light, Shabbos candles foster peace in the home. Seemingly, every candle in the house, even those not lit to fulfill a mitzvah, illuminates the house, preventing its occupants from stumbling and bringing peace to the home. What then is the unique quality of the Shabbos candles in that they specifically become the primary lights that avert discord and also the spread of impurity? The truth, however, is, and this is a very interesting psychological insight. The truth, however, is that this is not the case. The light of ordinary candles unrelated to a mitzvah, is not always conducive to peace. Sometimes the opposite may happen. Sometimes with the added light, a person may see someone or certain movements or features of his in a way that the person can't tolerate. In this way, the light may very well engender discord. In other words, the more I know about somebody, that could actually distance me from that person, right? When you dim the lights, everybody looks beautiful, right? You turn the lights on, all of a sudden I see all the features that I don't like. I don't just mean physical, I mean spiritual as well, right? So it's very easy to fall in love with someone you don't know. When you know the person, loving the person is actually in some cases can be harder. So interestingly, light does not necessarily lead to peace. The only genuine light, the light referred to in the verse for a mitzvah as a candle and the Torah as light, and the entire Torah was given to make peace in the world. This is true and trusted source of unity and peace in the home. In other words, what we're saying is as follows. We're saying is, if you want peace in the home, you have to introduce Shabbos candles. Why? Because Shabbos candles have a double feature. First of all, it brings physical light in the home. That's a wonderful thing. But physical light per se doesn't necessarily bring peace. To the contrary, sometimes physical light could bring division, as we've said, because sometimes seeing too much about the other person, I see not only nobody's perfect, and therefore I see not only their good things, I also see their faults. So we say that true peace comes about through Shabbos candles. What is Shabbos candles? Light related to a mitzvah. Right? Light related to the Torah. In other words, I'm looking at the light, I'm looking at the physical thing, but I'm looking at it through the perspective of the Torah. And the perspective of the Torah, as we'll elaborate later, the essay elaborates later, perspective of the Torah is to bring peace in the world, because the perspective of the Torah shows me what my true purpose is in this context and gives me the perspective from the eyes of the Torah. And therefore, then I have true unity with the people and within my home and with the people around me, because I see not necessarily their faults, which ordinary lights will allow me to see, but I see them from the perspective of the Torah, and the Torah represents harmony, as we will discuss, or the essay will discuss. So that's the big idea here. The big idea here is, again, how do we get to this? We're talking about the law, and the law says, we're going to explain Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says that if somebody walks into my home while I'm lighting candles, and the way the commentary to Tiferes Yisrael says, we're talking about Shabbos candles. While I light my Shabbos candles, as much time as it takes to light a Shabbos candle, that's how much time the house is protected. And then we're going to bring into the mix the Rebbe's father's interpretation and say that this law symbolizes something deeper. It's not just a technical law of how much time could elapse, but it's telling you that the theme of the Shabbos candle protects you against Tzarrat. What's the theme of the Shabbos candle? Well, light. Light in the home brings peace, but light in the home doesn't always bring peace. Light in the home related to the Torah brings peace, because then I see you, and I see my home, and I see the objects in my home from the light, from the perspective of the Torah. And in short, I'll just give you the conclusion. In short, what the Rebbe is going to say here is that the Talmud says that the purpose of the Torah is to bring peace in the world. What does that mean? How does Torah bring peace in the world? Because when you look superficially, there is a battle, there's war, there is discord between the physical and the spiritual. It's a conflict. The Torah teaches you there's a conflict between God and the world, between our perspective and God's perspective, between what I want to do, what my selfish self wants, and what I understand is the transcendent will of God. So on the surface, there is conflict between the two perspectives. The Torah teaches that in truth, the world itself was created by God. The world itself, the physical itself, can be connected to holiness, and the physical itself will be even happier when it connects to the transcendent. In other words, the Torah helps us understand that the world and God are at peace. And it's not just the world and God, it's also between people. Essentially, me and you could unite only from the perspective of the Torah. Because spiritually, if you see my spark of God and your spark of God are related, therefore I too and you are one entity, and we can be in peace because it's not me against you. We're essentially at the core level, we're interconnected. But that comes from the perspective of the Torah, that comes from the perspective of the soul. So what we're saying here is like this, that the Torah in general brings peace in the world, but specifically the mitzvah of Shabbos candles, because it has the virtue that, number one, it brings you physical light into your home. So it's connecting the physical world with the theme of the Torah. So you get the wholesome peace. You get, number one, you get peace that I'm not tripping over stones. But then you have the metaphorical idea of not tripping over stones. Not tripping over stones means not to make the mistake and not to stumble over the stone on the tree, on the stick. Not to stumble over the concept and think that the physical is actually at war and at conflict with the spiritual. And the Shabbos candles bring physical peace into the home, but they also bring spiritual peace because they show us that it embodies the concept that the Torah and the world are at peace. And again, the point is, regular light doesn't necessarily do this. Sometimes when you turn on the lights, it actually highlights a division between people. But if you have physical light, that is an expression of a light of the mitzvah, meaning a light of the Torah, then all of a sudden here, I see how the physical objects in my life or the physical people in my life may or may not be different than me, may have certain faults. I also have faults. It's okay. But if I'm looking at it from the perspective of the Torah, then I see how this is we're all interconnected. And the perspective of the Torah would bring peace between all of them. So this is a little bit poetic, but this is the idea of the essay. So you can continue reading the essay, or you could think about what we did until now. In any case, for me, the most meaningful point here was that light doesn't necessarily bring people together. It can actually separate people. The more I know about you on one hand, it could separate me. But if I'm looking from the perspective of the Torah, then it's the opposite is true. The more I know about you and about myself, even the faults, I realize the beauty in that. And I realize that God wants us to be together so we can actually grow from each other and grow from our imperfections as well. So I thought that was profound. So thank you all for joining. Have a wonderful day. And God willing, we should meet in good health.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks, Rabbi.